Yes, it's true. It's me, Phil. You're here at Fantasy Authors Handbook for episode number 29 of the 100 book challenge. Ooh, 29 books through already. That's 29% of the way. We know what the 100 book challenge is. That's where I read 100 books I already own before I buy any new ones. This one is Batman, the War Years, 1939 to 1945, as compiled and with notes by Roy Thomas. Let's take a closer look. Here we are then. Let's just dive into this. I'm going to flip through it and just sort of talk about my thoughts as I go merrily along with Batman, the War Years, 1939 to 1945 by Roy Thomas. I'm going to kind of reach in here. There they are, right? The dynamic duo saluting the troops. And there's a lot of saluting the troops in here, So again, this is compiled by Roy Thomas, who also wrote some kind of short introductions to each of the sections. To give it a little bit of context, let's talk about the difference between context and a little bit of context. A good, introduction here that basically sets the scene, right? There is a war brewing in Europe. Things are getting weird between Japan and China. America is still, for the most part, just kind of pretending it's not happening, or tacitly, assisting certain friendly powers, right? Aid is going to England, which obviously Hitler and the Nazis don't love. Aid is going to China, which the, Imperial Japan also doesn't love. But no hostilities yet have been formally initiated between the United States and anybody. So this is really starting off in 1939. Now, World War II has begun in earnest in both the Pacific theater and in the European theater. The, Nazi Germany has invaded Poland already. Those sort of first dominoes were falling, Austria, etc. Italy is firmly under the control of Mussolini and firmly allied with Nazi Germany. It's not looking good in Europe. And so that's really, in the introduction, you're getting sort of a lot of that. But in the meantime now here, Batman, who's still a pretty new character on the scene-ish, newish, isn't fighting the war yet. But there is a little bit of kind of, I don't know about these people over there. Am I taking a stand? And remember, too, at this time, this was before anybody thought, comic books are going to have this adult audience, that I don't know that anyone was ever looking forward into the future to, that kind of Vertigo and Dark Horse and, the sort of, much less the R. Crumb kind of era of underground comics. So these comics, and when you read these, they're definitely aimed for little kids. They're very simple. The art ranges from like, wow, that's actually really good. It's like really dark and strange and dynamic. And then a bunch of it that's just kind of like, and scribble, and we're done. Deadline met. Yay. Right? So here in part one, he really is just covering, Batman is kind of starting to think, hey, maybe something weird is going on across either of the oceans, right? Both of the oceans. And where do we fall in that, right? So, in context here, we're getting these sort of, the original Batman from Detective Comics. So we're kind of seeing that this is a guy who fights crime. These are criminals. A guy is robbing this, that, and the other thing. Batman is a detective in the vein of the sort of current, at that time, current pulp heroes like the Spider and the Shadow and so on. So that's what we're really seeing. We're seeing Batman still just fighting criminals. But then it starts to get maybe kind of a little bit weirder, right? There's a sense of there's somebody out there. There's this kind of strange fascist leaning that's happening. And there's kind of like this guy, right, who looks like Napoleon, is, that there's kind of a political almost, and I mean really barely at this point, like barely, but a kind of a political or sort of, in a way nationalist edge to it, but it hasn't really gotten to the point where, Batman is literally fighting the Nazis, which, spoiler alert, we'll see as this progresses. But what's cool is that Roy Thomas is actually presenting, in some cases, full issues. Or really, if you see any interior pages, you're getting the full issue, which is nice. You're seeing the full context. And as I'm reading these, I'm reminded of comic books from this era and the sort of quality of storytelling, which is extremely sparse, right? There is a bad guy is trying to do a thing, which in these very early Batmans is ripping off somebody, right? We're going to steal the whatever jewels. We're going to steal the thing. We're going to steal the payroll in one of these stories, for instance. And Batman just goes to bring him to justice. And in these early issues of Batman, and this is again still early in his career, Batman just, like in some cases, just literally flat out kills people. He carries a gun. We don't see really the gun in these issues that you saw in the original few. But he's not averse to just like throwing bad guys off a building or something. Like, well, that was his problem. It's the cover where we meet Robin, the brand new adventures of the Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder. So we're seeing he's giving us sort of these interstitial covers to kind of track the genesis of the character from Detective Comics to Batman. This is only number 3, and now we have, right, Robin is fully ensconced in there. In this period, you start to see the villains becoming more foreign, right? More European. And surprisingly, not getting into the Asian stuff, which comes later, but even then, Batman seems to be really at his height, fighting really the Pacific Theater. But you can see now the thugs are becoming uniformed agents of a foreign power. The bad guys are looking like dastardly kind of Eastern European types, right? And it does get a little bit on the dark side. But that's the thing with Batman always was, the darker character, right? Even in these early books that were, again, definitely drawn and conceived for kids, but even then, really just pretty violent. I mean, Batman's just beating the you-know-what out of people, and so is Robin, right? A teenage boy who's right there just mixing it up and just like beating people, yeah? And so here we get the Joker story, and there's still a sense of, there's this sort of vague menace out there that the Joker is just doing this thing where I don't remember what he's doing. He's just kind of hypnotizing people, and he's robbing certain places with these weird messages that are meant to confuse everybody. Batman doesn't really fall for it. There's an awful lot of fisticuffs and so on. And then we're getting into things like where we're starting to get into a little bit of the war effort. pause here while I actually put my reading glasses on so I can see any of this stuff. Let's see if I can read this. Worst of all menaces, worst of all criminals is the fifth columnist. Treacherous, dangerous as a snake, he burgles the secrets of a peace-loving people, in an attempt to smash American democracy. So here now we're getting more into the war effort, and this is only September issue of 1941, so this is pre-Pearl Harbor, but there's already, here is Batman, right, the writers of Batman, which were, Bill Finger, starting to get into this idea that we are on this side, clearly aligned against Japan and against Germany and Italy, against what was only becoming to be known as the Axis powers. And these foreign powers know that, and so they're sending dudes that look like this, right, to sabotage, to spy on. And here he's sort of hypnotizing scientists to, do or commit acts of sabotage. Here we're seeing now the big bombers already being designed and built, and bad guys trying to disrupt that war production, even though the war hadn't actually started. In the September issue of Batman 1941, which probably came out on newsstands at least a month before that, right? This would have been late July, early August, right, of 1941, something like that. So still a few months away from Pearl Harbor, but already the popular culture is starting to recognize we're not in this 100%, but we're in this. And if we're in this a little bit, that means that the bad guys are going to be responding a little bit. And this is Batman and Robin against fifth columnists, right? Terrorists or saboteurs sent from, and at this point, I don't think they say who it is. Yeah. The blimp, which, if you've ever seen pictures in that great film of the Hindenburg with bearing proudly, unfortunately, the swastika on it, is, right, this is sort of, it was until, of course, it exploded horribly, in one of the great sort of prequel metaphors of all time. And, in that film, you can see the swastika slowly devoured by flames. Is this, to me, definitely reads, hey, these are Nazis. But at this point, they're kind of not really saying that they're Nazis. And then in this story, this was from January 41, 42. Again, this would have been drawn, finished into the printer before Pearl Harbor. And here we're seeing Batman going up against a scientist who is playing around with radioactivity. So again, this was something that was being talked about. And in the previous video, when I talked about the science fiction novel, in social criticism, and that essay by Heinlein, and we talked a little bit about that story that he wrote that predicted the atomic bomb, or predicted nuclear energy, right as the very secret projects were in progress to actually make that thing happen. And that drew the attention of the FBI because he was so close. Here you can see that is still a thing, right? That Heinlein wasn't the only one who was reading articles about radioactivity, reading about whatever. Certainly experiments with radium way predate this. And here we're getting this idea that radioactivity is something that scientists are working on, and we need to make sure that we are the people who are working on that we're policing that before you get this really, basically Jekyll and Hyde story that's happening in this book that I just thought was cool. But this is what I mean, right? That sort of caricature of the guy with the pointy beard. This was really still a sort of World War I image of this is sort of, look, it's the green radioactive Prussian guy, that kind of thing. Great Phantom of the Opera moment, if you know what I mean. And again, we're seeing America as an industrial power read throughout. So here by now it's at Batman number 10, the April-May 42 issue, well, where the United States of America is at war, and hence part 2, the home front war. So a decision was made that I honestly believe was the correct decision, to not necessarily, right, send the superheroes off to war. Don't send Batman to the front. That would have been, honestly, I think it would have been, especially in the context of this massive all-out conflagration, that would have been not in the best taste to have Batman kind of, punching Hitler in the face. They were doing that at a different publisher with Captain America. But Batman fought the war on the home front. And for the most part, what he was doing was just kind of making sure that there were no fifth columnists or, sort of Nazi spies causing any kind of a rumpus in Gotham City. But most of what was happening, certainly Roy Thomas talks about this in the introduction, was kind of business as usual for Batman. Like a lot of the issues during this period of time, even in the sort of, first explosive year of the war for America, it was for the most part still Batman versus ordinary criminals, right? But again, you can see the covers are starting to read as somebody's goofing around in the airplane factory, which is one factory you don't want to goof around with. Detective Comics added the boy commandos. That's not familiar to me at all. I might want to check that out, but that's a little weird, right? Kids going off to war, is that what it is? And then you can, of course, see, and he's using these covers, in particular, showing us these covers. World's Finest Comics. Everything becomes patriotic. It's the dashing Caucasian soldier, the sort of dashing, equally in some other way, the sort of handsome and rugged Caucasian sailor, and congratulations, boys, and you go get them, and we're proud of you, and that kind of stuff, right? Which was propaganda. I don't think that there's any way that you can look at this cover and not just say that this is wartime propaganda, because this is so wartime propaganda that I don't think there's a single image from the American side. There's those great, weird, crazy, beautifully designed Soviet era propaganda posters that are just kind of, well, if that wasn't turned to the dark side, that was really something to see. Here, World's Finest Comics just goes all in on yay the Navy, right? We're going to drive in a Jeep. War savings bonds and stamps keep them rolling. And throughout this, you're going to see that theme. So Batman obviously isn't a recruiting tool. He doesn't seem to be being used as a recruiting tool. He's not saying, or at least nothing in these stories are saying, hey guys, join up for the big win. This is clearly meant to be read by kids. And so what can kids do? They could maybe save up their allowance and get some of these war stamps and war bonds, or, maybe encourage their parents to do that. And it just sort of says, here's what you can do on the home front, especially if you're a little kid. And it encourages them, in some cases, even to make sure you collect paper for the paper drives. Here the Joker is up to some shenanigans. And this is one story that's very significant where, in spoiler alert, the Joker actually realizes that, hey, these guys are trying to steal the money from the war bond drive, like F them, right? So that even the Joker is kind of like, okay, we draw the line at something that is going to damage the American war effort. But again, here it's for the most part, we're going to the airplane factory, of course we are. But for the most part, the stories in the interior are still crime stories. They're still detective stories. The covers do tend to be more patriotic, more war effort oriented. And then this was the first story that really just went right at it. I mean, how do you have the opening splash page for still for very, really young kids, Batman and Robin, and there's just the swastika right there, and then there's just this, not Hitler, right? But of course he has the monocle, this leering, evil German guy. And the Nazis were evil, by the way. They actually really were. Because it's 2025 in America, I have to say that out loud. So here we have, again, we're looking at the fifth columnist. There's this secret, look at, I love the light fixture, like, what the heck, right? Just this idea that, and it felt true, right, of the Nazi regime. They just put a swastika on everything. It's like a band from Portland putting a bird on it. It's crazy, right? But here we actually have this underground Nazi spy ring. And, of course, the handsome, blonde, Aryan reporter guy is secretly working for the Nazis. And in this story, I remember it seemed really like Batman and Robin were surprised. Like, what? Like, there's what here? They're what? What are they? It can't be. Nazis here in Gotham City. And they just take it right to them. The violence is relatively extreme. Yeah. Things you don't really see in kids' media anymore. Guys with Tommy guns. But in another sort of nod to the Phantom of the Opera, they take down the swastika light fixture, and that's what they use to capture the German fifth columnists. And so from this point on, and let me go back and check what that story, when this issue was actually published, before it got to be, no, we need to just, the Nazis are the villains in real life, and so let's just go with them. This is October, November 1942. So the first full year of the war for the United States, right, has been now completed, and it's not looking like it's going to be a quick one. It's not looking like, oh, we'll just mop these guys up, whatever. They're not really. It was right away. It was bad. And it was looking like it was going to be long and terrible. And it was long and terrible. So here, Roy Thomas, again, talks about how Batman doesn't go to the Ardennes. He doesn't go to Okinawa. He's guarding the home front. Speaking of flat out, unapologetically propagandistic imagery, Batman and Robin on the giant eagle with the bomber in the background. It's like you just have to sort of let that sink in and, struggle with that, because the enemy that they were fighting, Nazi Germany, was so awful that if ever there was in the entire history of the world a group of people you needed to just blow to smithereens, they were it. So it's hard to say, oh, this feels creepy, like nationalism or whatever. This got a little strange, especially aimed at kids. Batman with the just flat out blasting away with a machine gun. Robin's feeding the ammo in. Big smile on his face. Keep those bullets flying. Keep on buying war bonds and stamps. Every cover had some kind of indication of buy war bonds. was it the guilt of, hey, we got this kid to spend a dime on this instead of giving a dime to the war effort? I don't know. Maybe we can say, oh, this was the price tag from the library sale. Specialty item, $7 I paid for this book. Oh, what a great deal. Don't sleep on your library sales. Unless you're doing a 100-book challenge and then you skip it and then you suffer, but anyway. So again, we just continue with Batman and Robin fighting the war. Here we see this idea, this kind of corruption of the innocent idea of these sort of dastardly spies. Or this guy is actually just a criminal who kind of recruits this kid into, who's, really enamored of Batman and Robin. He's just like, Batman and Robin are the coolest. They're the best. And he's like this little shoeshine boy. And this guy convinces him that he is Batman. And I'm going to train you to be the boy wonder, to be just like Robin. And the kid falls for it, of course. And just sort of gets, and I think what this story really meant to say, and why Roy Thomas included it, is that this is kind of, here is a kid getting red-pilled. Here is a kid being read into the conspiracy stories, or here is a kid being not even read into the conspiracy stories, but suckered into this idea that this guy is the hero. And in fact, really what he's doing, this little kid, is just assisting him in burglaries, until the kid kind of starts to figure it out, like, hey, that's weird. Like, why are Batman and Robin trying to stop us from doing this? And the guy, how about that for an image that you probably wouldn't see in kids' media today, right? Grown man strangling him. And so eventually the kid figures out that, like, wow, wait, this is the real Robin. Why do I seem to be, like, what the heck? Am I the bad guy? How am I the bad guy? I'm not the bad guy, right? And of course, Batman and Robin save the day, and they talk him into going to military school. What? Right? But that's the thing. Like, well, you're just this little street ragamuffin guy, and I know you didn't mean to become like a junior second story man. So, tell you what, why don't we'll get you, fixed up with this military academy, and then you're going to grow up to fight the good fight. This next story, I think, is really one of the key issues in this book. It's called The Two Futures. And in this one, Batman goes to these experts, right? These kind of scientists, or they're historians, whatever, they're like university professors. And again, the storytelling is always that vague. They'll kind of say, we're going to go talk to Professor so-and-so, and Professor so-and-so just tells them what's up. And Batman and Robin, or Robin is kind of worried about, hey, what's going to happen? Like, this seems like we're in trouble here, and I don't know. And so Batman's like, yeah, me too. Let's go talk to some experts about what might happen, right? And so the experts say, well, listen, it's bad. This Nazi war machine is massively powerful. They could win. And let's talk about what happens when they do win. Question that I maybe could be answered is, did Philip K. Dick read this as a kid? Because it begins with, what if the Nazis win World War II? And what it imagines is, of course, Gotham City under Nazi occupation, innocent people now in literal concentration camps, just being beaten by these Nazi guards, the swastika flag flying over Gotham City. But Batman and Robin are still there, right? Which says that even under this brutal occupying power, these guys are still heroes. That part of the future will not change. The world will always have Batman and Robin as devoted, capable defenders of Gotham City, even under a Nazi regime. So they kind of help this little kid get his mother out of the concentration camp. And it's pretty grim stuff, you know. Certainly, I would think for a little kid reading this in 1943, going like, "Wait, what's going to happen? Oh no!" Right? But on the other hand, Batman and Robin are there to save the day until they face a Nazi firing squad. So this idea that, hey kids, don't be thinking that, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Yeah, there's going to be like maybe some camp set up. The Nazis are going to be mean to people, but there's still Batman and Robin, and they're going to save us. And they're trying to say like, no, once this thing gets established, there's no saving. Right? Two well-meaning guys can't defeat the Nazi war machine. So just this grim wake-up call there. But then they tell the professors like, well, that can't be, right? That's terrible. Like, thanks for having this confidence in us that we'll be here to continue to fight, but like, wow, you have us get killed in the end. And they said, well, of course, that isn't the only future. There are two futures. The other future is that the good guys win. And then it's really a question of, and this is really the first time you see Batman in action, right? Actually taking it to the enemy, the Japanese, right? Just really fighting in the skies, fighting in the Pacific, and just taking it to them. And, in the end, it's sort of, we can do it. We are the shining beacon on the hill, right? America victorious. And so then in the end, it's basically, well, what can we do? Like, what can we do? And by we, really, obviously, they're talking to little kids. What can you do? Right? And so Batman and Robin say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go out there and we're going to raise money for the war effort. And they have this bond drive, which just seems so quaint and sad in a way, but it was, I don't know how to fix this. Guy drawing Batman comic books for kids and little kids reading this, like, that's so overwhelming. I mean, grown, adults, World War I veterans, right? Or, people who were not squeamish about stuff were worried about what was happening. So what do kids do? Like, we can still fight for the good future of the two by supporting war bond drives. And then a Scarecrow story. This one is, where the Scarecrow is just kind of doing Scarecrow kind of stuff, but then again is sort of caught up in with these kind of Nazi agents and also sort of doesn't realize it. And you are sort of seeing the villains used as dupes, right? Like, what is the in for the evil Nazi fifth columnists, the spies and terrorists and saboteurs? I showed this when I first was looking through this, when I did bring it home in that library sale book haul video. This cover, which for me really characterizes American wartime propaganda, where you see the recognizable Hitler, the recognizable Mussolini, and then the wildly out there racist caricature of just, who do we believe that is? Tojo? Or just Japanese? And to me, this is, I think, showcases this idea that is just so clear, looking at really any kind of media coming from that era. And certainly, and I talked about this a little bit, where my mother, who was just a little girl, both my parents were just little kids in World War II. Way, way too young. My father, way too young to, be drafted. Single-digit age kids. And for the rest of her life, she was clearly and almost in a way subconsciously, but severely racist against Asian people in general. I had a friend who, through my whole childhood, who was a Chinese American, and my mother would say the weirdest things about him. She wouldn't, like scream racial epithets at him. But she would say stuff like, I don't like that kid. He looks at me like he knows something I don't, which made no sense to me, right? And like, what are you talking about? He's the nicest guy in the world. He's just as American as I was. He was born in Chicago. He's not, I mean, what do you think he is, right? And she just, I don't know. She just had this weird, uneasy feeling because as a little girl, it was pounded into her head that these guys are a political problem. We're going to save Germany and Italy from these two bad guys. This guy is a subhuman monkey-like thing that should never be trusted under any circumstances, and all of the insert racial epithet here need to just get thrown back to the Stone Age from whence they come. This was a political war. This was a race war. It just absolutely was. This was not helped, of course, by the fact that Japan saw it the same way. Where did that leave us? I mean, what good did that bring to the world? What did a race war in the Pacific bring to anyone except horror and misery and death and deprivation and 2 atomic bombs? In case you're wondering, in case you're wondering well, I mean, they're not talking about me. They're just scapegoating other people. And I don't know, maybe there's something no, there's nothing to that. And you know what I'm talking about. It was right to go after this guy. It was right to go after this guy. It was right to go after the leadership of this country, right? But we were not at war with Germans. We were not at war with Italians. We were at war with the Japanese. That's just true. That was a long time ago, but that doesn't mean we're immune to certain things. Yeah? And then anyway, here we go with more wartime saboteurs, Batman. And, here it is, right? I mean, even the bad guys are hiding out in this castle. Everything reads very European. It's about, and as a kid, I always loved the Batman TV series with Adam West and Burt Ward, right? Which was just goofy and fun. And every episode, the bad guy would put them into these just outlandishly crazy death traps. And then even as a little kid, I'm like 6 years old watching this, going like, and then they just leave? They just walk away like, okay, bye, Batman, enjoy your doom or something. And then they would just leave. And Batman and Robin, well, we're in a sticky wicket now. Batman, what are we going to do? Like, and then they would get, obviously every single time work their way out of the trap. And then the villain of the week would just be flabbergasted, like, what? How are you here? Why aren't you dead? I set up this perfect trap. It was so perfect that I just figured, of course it will go to plan, so I'm just going to walk away and go do some other stuff. We went to the mall or something? I mean, what are you doing? I mean, the writers would kind of add a little context, like, I would love to say and watch you meet your doom, Batman, but I have to go steal the crown jewels or whatever. But in these comic books, I don't know why I was surprised by that. Because I never read Batman comics as a kid. For me, Batman was the silly TV show. And yeah, I guess there were some silly comic books. But I was definitely a Marvel Universe kid, where something about those characters and just the approach to it felt more serious. It felt more thought through. It felt more grounded. We were in New York. We weren't in Gotham City, all that kind of stuff. And I thought the villains were way more interesting. And I know that a lot of that was, in a way, damage done by that TV series. because it was so goofy that I just thought of Batman as goofy. Even though there's a little, I mean, there's a lot of goofy in this, but, you know, we all know that Batman is not necessarily built or meant to be the Adam West version. But anyway, through all of these stories, almost all of them, this happens, right? In it, like Batman and Robin get, like, sort of by the middle of some, you know, kind of act two, they are captured by the bad guys and put into the you know, these death traps. How am I going to get out of here? It's impossible. And then they somehow do work their way out. Look at all the fire and stuff. Like, oh, we got to get out of here, Batman. And they figure out these sort of, we're going to say ingenious, which is, and by saying ingenious ways, I'm giving them tons of extra credit, because most of it is very hand wavy. It's sort of, and then Batman pulled out the this particular trap tool that he has in his, I mean, just sort of, oh my God, that is so dastardly. And then Batman just goes like, yeah, that would have been if I wasn't Batman, and I can just automatically get out of stuff. But, you know, anyway, there's the full illustration of riding the giant eagle. Keep the American eagle flying by war bonds and stamps. Damn it. This issue is fun. Batman and Robin meet the man with camera eyes. Basically, this is a guy who has perfect memory. And some bad guys are like, now wait a minute. Like, if this guy can just read a book and instantly become an expert in that, do all sorts of, they start to actually use him as some kind of weird version of AI. Like, we can just train this guy real quick, and he's going to help us, you know, with gambling. He's going to help us, you know, with robberies. He's going to help us plan the perfect robbery and stuff like that. The guy, of course, is just this sort of, well, he does this act, and everybody's kind of like, yeah, that act is not that great. Like, oh, yes, you memorize something. Fantastic. And so he's a little bit down and out, and then these guys are like, hey, you can help us by doing all this. And so he does, but in a way kind of unwittingly. He doesn't necessarily know, hey, these guys are terrible thieves and bad guys. But he does stuff like, you know, instantly learn how to fly the bat plane and steals it and so on. And then in the end, really, Batman says, okay, hey, I'm not going to send you to jail because this kind of weird superpower that you have is too valuable for the war effort. And he convinces the guy, you need to use this ability for good. And so the guy's like, yes, I do. I'm going to do that. Thanks, Batman. You're right. I'm going to climb on with the team and go for the big win. Yay. And the end. So again, the writing here is just like, what? Like setup, confusion, coincidence, just kind of figure out the trap real quick, and get the bad guy, punch some dudes, like fully just punch some dudes, and then have some kind of winning smile moment. Yay, we did it, you did it. Well, everything's going to be fine now because of the thing. That illustration is crazy. Closing the ring, right? This is where the war starts definitely moving. This would be D-Day and after. Definitely starts moving in our direction. And again, you're seeing, we're going to do a little bit of a caricature, well, really a caricature of Mussolini, make Hitler just look like a little goofball, and then just do the crazy giant bucktooth racist thing. I don't know, right? This story, the crime clinic, they have this professor who is just super smart about strategy and tactics. And these mobsters go to him and they're like, hey, maybe you could, like just hypothetically, like if you were going to rob this bank, how would you do that? And he's like, well, that's an interesting puzzle. Let me think about that. And he gives them a plan. He draws up a plan for them. Here's how you do it. And they go and they rob the bank and everything goes as planned. Okay, what about if we rob this kind of place? Oh, yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah, this is an interesting problem. So they go through this whole process of learning how to do these things, build these weird machines, do all sort, or get, this is like the vacuum chamber, going into all this sort of war effort stuff, trying to steal stuff. And then in the end, it's another one where, oh man, look, you should be using your powers of brilliant strategizing. How did George W. Bush put it? Strategery. Use your powers of strategery to help win the war. And he's like, yeah, you're right. Okay. The end. What the heck? And again, it just keeps going back and hitting the war bonds and stamps. Everything is about war bonds. This is the bond wagon. We're going to go and we're going to hire actors to play different, sort of different historical figures. And, Batman has trouble finding these guys because all the strong young men are off to war. So he ends up hiring kind of the down and out and, some convicted criminals. Like, hey guys, whatever, yeah, you robbed a couple, 2, 3 liquor stores and nobody's going to give you a chance out there in the world. Why don't you come be part of this? We're going to recreate all of these great scenes from American history while the bad guys try to stop us in order to collect money for the war effort. And they do, and then it turns out like now they have to really fight against these guys. Like, what are they trying to do? They're trying to steal the war bond money. And then what's going on? They have this ship, and then they're attacked by a U-boat, but they fight back. And so now all these ordinary guys who are just pretending to be figures from history. Robin ends up doing the Paul Revere thing. But they actually end up confronted by and fighting actual, like the Nazi U-boat and Nazi agents, and not only, sort of performing for this war bond drive, but literally physically going out and fighting the war effort at home. The U-boat menace was obviously something that people in New York were worried about. And I've seen these old photographs that were taken from German U-boats during the war of the New York skyline, like they were right there. So it's not weird that Gotham City, which is sort of one of the New Yorks in the DC universe, would be concerned with the U-boat menace right offshore. And so here we have Batman working really hard to try to do something about that, right? And this gets weird. This gets to fantasy land, right, which is great. And this is where Batman accidentally goes to Atlantis. He gets caught in this huge whirlpool while chasing this Nazi U-boat and comes to the undersea city of Atlantis, which opens up these whirlpools, which is how they can get up and down to the surface. And it turns out when they get there, they're like aligned with the Nazis. What do you mean? And so this, like the, fantasy city, right, of Atlantis has been completely infiltrated by the Nazis, who have convinced them that, like, hey, up there on the surface, there's this huge war and the evil Americans are trying to enslave everybody and they're bad. And so what we have to do is we have to stop them because we're the Nazis and we're the best. And the Atlanteans apparently don't really, like check on that, right? They don't Google it. And they're just like, oh, really? Oh, that's terrible. So yeah, we're on your side, 100%, because we're good guys and you're good guys too. And so Batman and Robin end up in Atlantis and are immediately considered the enemy, right? But then there's the princess who has kind of a thing for Robin. And she's like, I don't know, you don't seem like evil and stuff. And he's like, but because we're not, man, we're not evil. We're the good guys. But meanwhile, Batman's being like tortured and stuff. And, you know, basically the story is, how do we convince these people that we're the good guys and the Nazis are the bad guys? And it's actually a really interesting story because it's not easy for them to do. But finally, of course, spoiler alert, they win out in the end. The only sad part here is when you can see sad Dick Grayson there. Well, he's never going to see the beautiful Atlantean princess girl ever again. I don't know. Maybe he does later on in the comic books. I hope so. I hope so. Can you name a comic book in 1943 Blitzkrieg Bandits? Apparently you can. Here's another one where, where the terrible kind of Nazi thugs are trying to infiltrate and steal and all that kind of stuff. And is this another one of the professors? There's more than one professor, and I got them a little bit mixed up. But I think by this point you kind of get it, right? That every once in a while Batman and Robin will fight some kind of, Nazi agent or saboteur, spy, etc. Or some bad guys who are just doing the most un-American thing of trying to steal the money from a war bond drive. Which is where, like, even the, like, supervillains are like, oh, yeah, no, man. Like, too far. Like, way too far. And, here we see the sailors coming to help and everything. I don't know. At this point, I think, again, we've all got the idea. But for the most part, if you're a Nazi and you come to Gotham City to goof around, you're going to have Batman to deal with. Here's another sort of fantasy story, this sort of what-if story of the year 3000. And here, the Earth has become this peaceful, great utopia, clearly because we have we've won the war for the good guys. And now it's the year 3000 and everything is just so perfect that when the evil aliens show up, they just take us over right away. So this starts to go into that next level propaganda of, well, it looks like we're going to win this, and so let's start teaching people that the next one is right around the corner and we have to be ever vigilant. In other words, the giant military-industrial complex is firing on all cylinders. Let's keep that going, even after this war is over. So these two guys the guy and the young kid, find a time capsule from the year 1939, so from before the war. And they see these characters, right? Who are these guys? There's like these, back in the day, a long, long time ago, were these guys, Batman and Robin, and they were like really good at just kind of keeping the peace, and they made sure that Gotham City was safe from Nazi fifth columnists. And this guy gets the idea, like, what if I adopted that persona? What if I became Batman in the year 3000? Could I convince people to stop just submitting to the evil alien regime? And so he becomes, in this weird twist, right, kind of a strange twist issue, where this guy in the future becomes, and this other kid they become Batman and Robin, having seen them in this time capsule, and do, in a way, what all the villains so far in this book have been doing, which is subverting the fascist regime and working from within to try to overturn it, right? So they are the fifth columnists now. Batman is the saboteur. Batman is the spy. Batman is the fifth columnist. And, with Robin along for the ride. But he serves as an example. He's like, hey, everybody, we can stand up to these guys. We don't have to just go, we're peace-loving people and we don't understand the war-like ways of these warlike way people. And so I guess they're just the bosses now. And so he uses this future Batman, the ideals of Batman and Robin, to get everybody together, right? To be a focus point, a focal point hero, to turn the tide and get these evil aliens who turn out to be robots off of the earth, and he wins. And then, of course, it turns out that he is actually a descendant of the original Bruce Wayne. And yay, we did it. We saved the earth from the aliens by pretending to be Batman. Finally, we're at part 5, victory. Now the war is over. This one got a little bit... Roy Thomas kind of read into the basic, post-war narrative that, no, it was good that we dropped the A-bombs because the war in Japan would have just gone on, and millions and millions and millions of more people would have been killed. That is possible. I don't know, right? Nobody really knows for sure. But I always cringe when that kind of thing is said with such certainty. It is definitely going to be so horrible that we have to do this patently terrible thing, build this grotesque monstrosity in the first place, and then drop it on a city full of civilians that was not a military target. And just finally, because we don't believe that they're ever going to give up, because they're not really functioning humans. And it is true that culturally that was a problem for the Japanese. And so it's hard. I mean, it's hard. But I was a little disappointed that Roy Thomas didn't lean into the difficulty of this. And I think we need to understand that there's more to it than just the standard, this was bad that we did this, but it was a necessary evil because the only other outcome would have been worse. And I just don't know that that's a provable thing. That's me. I'm not an expert in anything, but sometimes when something happens out there in the world and you're not sure about it, and the story feels off, then I think it's right to ask questions. And also, I wasn't born yet in 1945 when that decision had to be made. It does feel like that decision was made not just to put an end to the war, which it did, and it was important to put an end to that war, but it was also to tell the rest of the world, do you want to start blowing stuff up? Because we're better at blowing stuff up than anybody's ever been. We have now made the ultimate achievement in blowing stuff up. So what's the rest of the world going to look like? I don't know. Now I'm on a soapbox. But this is what things like this, I think, were meant to do in a way, right? Is to get you engaged in thinking, right? So anyway, we're back to Batman and Robin. The war is over. Batman goes to Washington. And it's really just like, we're the best. We did it. We did it. And look at these grouchy people who are like, oh, we're not going to give up so soon, you people. And so we go on a tour of Washington, D.C. to remind ourselves of what democracy is. Maybe we could get people to read this issue of Batman Now. Yeah. And that puts this into some kind of context that says, we were right to do this thing because these guys were wrong in everything that they were doing. And we are just better people than them. Yeah? And so here, these are just the last few issues where, okay, come on, we're almost there, guys. It's August, September 1945. It's right at the end. Here's a new gun from the folks back home, soldier. Like Batman and Robin go like to Okinawa just for that. Yep, the folks that are back in the seventh war loan. I mean, this like really starting to hit specific programs, and he just leaves it to end like that. That is it. I don't even remember the number at this point. Was it 29? I don't know what it was. In the 100 book challenge, Batman, the war years 1939 to 1945. It was eye opening. I do wish that Roy Thomas dug deeper into the context around this. I think some of the issues were just kind of not really hitting the war years per se. But still, I mean, you can hear just in my sort of, as I'm flipping through thinking about this, it got me thinking. It got me thinking about that period of time and the spread of propaganda. And is it propaganda if the other guys are really actually terrible? And how much do we talk to kids? How do we talk to kids about this? How do we talk to America? And to what degree did they saturate the media? And they did, with this buy war bonds, buy war bonds, buy war bonds, buy war bonds, right? You're 61 years old and you can't, enlist. But have you made a couple, $2, $3? Like, do you have a job or what? Like, you can throw $20, $100, whatever, into this. And of course, millions and millions of Americans did. And that all was made good because after the war, then there was this sort of next, like, sort of second industrial revolution, etc. And everything was touched by World War II, wasn't it? Certainly Batman. And this is, I think, this is the second volume of the War Years books. There's a Superman and Wonder Woman too that I gotta get them. I can't buy books yet, but once I can buy books again, I'm going to go look for those. I doubt I will find one for $7 at a library sale. But anyway, there you have it. This has been Batman the War Years, the continuing adventures of Phil's 100 book challenge, where I buy I buy 100 books before I read any. That's the next 100 book challenge. After this one's over, I'm going to do the reverse. I stop reading until I've bought. No, I'm not going to do that. I stop buying books until I've read 100 of the books that I already own. This was one of them. I will see you. I've already finished the next one. I'm still behind on the videos because of work and stuff. So anyway, thank you. This has been Phil, and I guess the thing where you're supposed to subscribe will be here, and then the next video or the other video to watch will be here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.